Good morning. It's so fun to see all of you bright, shiny faces. My name is Barbara Bynum. I'm one of the forum facilitators, and we're all here this morning, which is amazing. We have sometimes travel plans and whatnot that take us away. But Kathy Fevers is another one of the forum planners, Phoebe Benzinger, and Judy Ann Files. And we are always trying to make forum be the best it can for all of you. We haven't changed things in a really long time. We've been here, it's been working great, but it occurred to us that maybe a 9 o'clock start time in the fall and the winter and the spring might be good. But we don't know if that's what you guys want. I know it's what I want, but that doesn't matter. I'm all about the democratic process. So, if you have already looked at your email today, you would have seen an email from Forum at 6 a.m. this morning. And it is a very quick survey. I think there's a total of maybe 5 questions. You just check boxes or click a radio button. Really easy to do, but we really would appreciate your opinion on if we should move Forum. So that's pretty much what that's about. And I think it's really easy, but if you look at it and you're like, I don't understand how to click this link or something, let me know, we can help you. But that's what we're hoping for your feedback. It also asks you a few other questions, just so we kind of know who's coming to Forum, who's not coming to Forum, and why. And thank you, we would really appreciate that. So, with no further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Kathy Fevers for today's topic.
Thanks, Barbara. We have gotten numerous people who say, we would come if you started at 9, but 8 is too early for us. So we thought we needed to follow up this Barbara's survey, and we really would appreciate it if you take a minute and do that. It is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Alan Todd. I have been following him in the Montrose Press on Saturdays. He always has a column, a historical column there. And he started a series, historical places A through Z, names and places from A to Z. And it was so interesting. I looked him up and contacted him and said, would you put that together as a program and bring it to the forum? And I explained what the forum was, and he took us up on that. So we're about to hear about historical names and places in our area from A to Z. But first, a little bit about Alan. He grew up in Gunnison, so he's a Western Sloper. Graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in advertising. Spent a total of 40 years in the newspaper business, 26 of those in management and executive positions relating to marketing and advertising. And then he said in 2010, he returned to the Western Slope as quickly as he could. And he has been here ever since. He is the former owner and publisher of the Ouray County Plain Dealer and the Ridgeway Sun. When he sold those businesses, he opened up the sock mine on Main Street in Ouray. If you've seen that store, it's a little novelty store that specializes in selling socks. And he said that gave him a whole lot more freedom, and especially more freedom to write. So he's now a columnist, and perhaps you have read some of his pieces as well. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Alan Todd.
I appreciate that introduction. It makes me sound important. I've got 26 items to roll through because it's the alphabet. So we're going to run through all 26. So if I go about 2 minutes each, maybe we'll have some time for question and answer afterward. Hopefully you guys like this. This is kind of one of the fun things I do. Mostly I write about murder, mayhem, prostitutes, killings, bank robberies, things like that. So no murders here today, I don't think. Well, we'll find out. Here we go. Mount Abram is south of Ouray. You guys know what Mount Abram looks like when you're heading to Ouray. It's a pretty iconic view. Named after Abram Cutler, who was the first judge of Ouray County. He swore in the first trustees in 1876, and in 1877, the entire board of trustees was voted out of Ouray, and they refused to give up power. In fact, it was a year later they found the entire books of the city under sawdust at a sawmill. They had hid it. They refused to give up power. So it was so bad that people who were getting deeds transferred and things like that were having both mayors sign the paperwork just to cover themselves. So anyway, Cutler signed an arrest for the warrant of those gentlemen, Munn, Call, the other Munn, Captain Klein, who's an interesting character in his own. They were all the original trustees, and they were arrested for the unlawful withholding of the corporate books, papers, and they were arrested and brought before me, he said, for a preliminary examination. It was quite the ordeal. He said he got death threats walking down the street in Ouray because of that. The Beaumont Hotel, I thought there was more to this, but Beaumont means Beau and Mont, which is somewhat French, I guess, for beautiful mountain. So the Beaumont was the brainchild of 5 local investors, and they wanted a hotel as rich in experience as was the surrounding mining district. Interestingly, the gentleman's interest was in the front of the hotel, and the women got to enter off the side. So that's just the way it was. Cochetope Pass, or some people call it Cochetopa, because they like the A. That is south of Gunnison, southeast of Gunnison, near Highway 114. In Indian, it means Pass of the Buffalo or Buffalo Gate, and it's a low pass, so it was used a lot in the early days as a way to get through. And there are a lot of stories I've written about people going over Cochetope Pass because it was an easy way to get through in the winter. Or they thought so. A lot of them got stuck and died along the way. But anyway, in 1871, when the first silver excitement commenced in the San Juan, Mr. Otto Mears, who also built the $1 Million Highway when it was a toll road, Enos Hotchkiss, we'll talk about him, and others organized a company to build a wagon road from Saguache to Howardsville in San Juan County across Cochetope Pass to the Cebolla Valley, and there over to Lake Fork, the Gunnison, and the present site of Lake City. So it was a major highway back in the 1870s, 1880s. Dallas, which is close to where Kelvin Kent used to live, Dallas is, there's several names for Dallas. There's Dallas Divide, which you head over to go over to Telluride. There's Dallas Creek, which flows down to the town site of where Dallas is. And Dallas sits right at the corner of County Road 24 and Highway 550. Derived its name from, it's not very exciting, George M. Dallas, a diplomat and vice president in the James Polk administration. Woo! That's a doozy. So it consisted of the Dallas Hotel, the Palace Hotel, some saloons, of course, the warehouse, a depot, post office, and other structures. And fire destroyed a lot of it, but then after the fire, they platted the town, and but eventually they wanted the railroad there. Is what they wanted, and Ridgeway won the railroad. And so as soon as Ridgeway got the railroad, they literally picked up Dallas board by board and moved it to Ridgeway, and that was the end of Dallas. This is one of my favorite, Agnar. Do you know anybody know where Agnar is? Yes, there's a few. It's down southwest, Colorado. Has maybe 200 people. I've also seen it maybe has 130. It just depends on who's talking down in Agnar. It's so remote that one resident said that he might be 40 to 80 miles from town on any given day and never see nobody all day, and that's the way I like it. So originally, the founders wanted to call it Range, but then they thought that the post office might get it screwed up with Rangeley, so they just turned it around backwards and called it Agnar. And you can see that the average age in Agnar is 64 years old. Flynn Park, that's the park in Ouray that you see right next to the swimming pool. The ball field in that park is named after Ouray's own Smokey Joe Wood, who was a pitcher for the Red Sox. He played 14 seasons. He threw out his arm. He has an interesting story. When he left Ouray, he went to Hutchinson, Kansas, and he got found by the Red Sox when he was playing for a women's team. And he had to wear a dress and a wig. They would have about 2 or 3 players wearing dresses and wigs that were men playing for the women's team. And he was pitching, and he struck all those women out, and a few of the men. Anyway, that's the ballpark's named after him. The land for Flynn Park was given to the city by the Flynn family, whose roots date back to the 1890s. Joseph Flynn came at age 39, and he later sent for his wife. They owned quite a few things around town, and they still do, including the politics in town. They own that. So that is the Flynn family. By the way, there are 3 F families in Ouray. It's Flynn, Fico, Fidel. And if you're not related to them in some way, you don't belong in Ouray. Glenwood Springs was established in 1883. It was originally named Defiance, which is an interesting name. Early settler Hiram Pitt Bennett was a prominent Colorado attorney and promoter of the town, and he was enamored with the name because he was from Glenwood, Iowa, and where he practiced law. And Sarah Cooper, who was the wife of another town company member, was from Glenwood, Iowa as well. So there you go with Glenwood, and then of course the famous hot springs. So there's how you get Glenwood Springs. There's Enos Hotchkiss and his brother Preston, who spread influence across the western slope. They had their hand in everything around this area. Enos helped found Lake City in 1872. He also began the Civil World newspaper, which is still publishing today. He sent a copy of his first edition of the newspaper to Del Norte, and the news just excited everybody down there, and they all ran up to Lake City to dig into the mountains. Preston, his brother, incorporated Portland, which is between Ouray and Ridgeway, right about where the KOA is. And he built a sawmill there. He also had a merchandise store in Portland, Dallas, Ridgeway, Kelowna, and Telluride. Either he was really good at business or he was really bad. I don't know. He was all over the place. Preston left for Utah in 1892 and returned to Montrose in 1903, where he passed away. Imogene Pass, which is closed, as you all probably heard, especially on the Telluride side. They had a big rock fall. This connects Ouray and Telluride. It crests at 13,114. On the Telluride side, it winds down past Tomboy Mine, which I don't know if you all have ever read the book Tomboy Bride, but that's recommended. On the Ouray side, the road follows an old pack trail past the Campbird Mine, which I just wrote about a few weeks ago, actually. In 1966, the Ouray side was joined to the Telluride side, and only Mosquito Pass at 13,185 is a higher mountain pass that can be driven. And the name Imogene comes from the wife of an owner of the Campbird Mine, Imogene Richardson. Forever famous. Oops. Oops. Did I turn it on? Oh, there we go. This one, my favorite one's Jack's Cabin, is a cutoff located between Almont and Crested Butte. There's a shortcut that takes you over to the Taylor River. It was also called Howville because it was named after Jack Howe, who owned the cabin there. And Jack erected the cabin in 1875, kind of as a halfway house, and people would come over Cottonwood Pass. They would come down the Taylor River and they would stay at Jack's Cabin before they went up over Taylor Pass toward Ashcroft and on over to Aspen. That was the way to get to Aspen, was to come that way. There was no I-70, obviously. Jack and his partner were welcoming anywhere from 25 to 50 arrivals daily. In 1879, it was awarded a post office, but lost it in 1880. Sherwood asked for stamps, and 5 weeks later got a reply from the government that said his request was too informal, and Sherwood tendered his resignation, stating the government could send someone to run their shop as damned formally as they choose. Kevlar Pass, which is at 10,007 feet, kind of like Coachella Pass, it's a low pass. But it's a snowy pass, it gets a lot of snow up in that area. Named after J.A. Kevlar of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, which was a powerhouse company in Colorado back in the 1800s. There was a town up there called Kevlar, and on the Crested Butte side of Kevlar Pass, there was a short-lived camp called Irwin, which was founded in 1879, which had a population of 5,000 people at one time. There is a cemetery up there, and it has one of the original 50 burial markers remaining is a 17-year-old girl named Mary Bambro. Her marker reads, "My good people, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you soon shall be. Prepare yourselves to follow me."
A form of texting.
Yeah. Okay, where I live, up on Log Hill, just north of Ridgeway, it's the southeastern limit of the Uncompahgre Plateau, which extends north to Grand Junction. If you've ever read Muriel Marshall's book about the road along the Uncompahgre Plateau, it's a 90-mile road up on top. It's a great book, full of history of the Uncompahgre Plateau. Anyway, I digress. Large trees were coveted and harvested regularly up until the late 1980s up on Log Hill. The original owners of the Ouray Times explained how they descended the escarpment of the mesa, which would be this going down toward Ridgeway from the top of the mesa up there. And they said, with decorum and good luck, by locking both hind wheels and chaining a good-sized log to the hind axle to ease the descent, is how they got down. And it was such a common practice that at the bottom of the hill there were nothing but logs that they left there, and so it's called Log Hill. Marble, which in 1913 the population was about 1,500, now it's about 130. It is in the north end of Gunnison County, along the beautiful Crystal River. The name of the town is no mystery because they pull pure white, perfect marble out of there, or they used to. That drove the economy of the valley through the early 1900s, leading up to World War I, when people needed things to make bullets out of more than they needed things to make countertops with. So a description of marble from 1889, up the hill above the slate appears the wonderful marble beds, white, of the purest, finest quality, suitable for the sculptor's chisel and for the shipment over the world in the competition with anything ever known. Marble was shipped all over the place, including Ohio, California, Nebraska, Indiana, Montana. There are lots of places with marble in Colorado, like the Denver courthouse. The state capitol has it. The pavilion at Cheeseman Park has it. Gunnison Post Office has it. And the famous ones, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I think the marble for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier cracked, and they have a new block sitting at marble, but it's been sitting there for about 20 years. And nobody's taken it and used it yet. But okay, we're on to O. How am I doing for time?
You skipped another year.
What? Who's paying attention?
Old teachers, right?
Okay, Natarita. So this one source says Mr. Rockwell H. Blake, and another credits Mrs. Rockwell H. Blake with giving the Spanish name for Little Nature, Natura, to this western Colorado town in the early 1880s. You kind of wonder if they had a fight about that over the supper table every night. But Rockwell Blake was a well-respected rancher and farmer in the area. He ran cattle and he raised crops such as apples. In 1893, he was accused and acquitted of altering brands of stealing cattle. A jury in Montrose returned a verdict of not guilty. Blake's imprisonment during the Civil War broke his health. He located to the southwest to recuperate, which a lot of people did back in those days. He spent time in New and Old Mexico. He spent nearly 30 years in Natarita before moving to Montrose, where he died in 1909. Now we can do Ophir. South of Telluride, the town of Ophir was once a very promising mining, promise with great mining fortune. Very few succeeded up in Ophir. It was given its name from the Old Testament, which read, "And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold 420 talents and brought it to King Solomon." There was a lot of gold, and thus the early inhabitants of Ophir had set the bar very high. Ophir was the way people went over from Silverton over to Ophir. And that was like a major highway to get from one valley to the other, one area to the other. They would go over that way. But, you know, Silverton just had more allure. Silverton just had more precious metals over there. So people gravitated more toward Silverton than they did Ophir. So in the 1960, the census showed a population of 0 because the mayor, who was the lone resident of Ophir at the time, was in Grand Junction the day the enumerator came knocking. The way it goes. These days, they have a lot of people die in avalanche accidents over in Ophir area. It's a pretty big avalanche area. On to Poughkeepsie, which is down south of the Silverton area, just a little around in the Silverton area. It's just west of Animas Forks. There's a gulch, a tributary to the Uncompahgre River, a mine, a mountain pass, and a ghost town, which all bear this name. The altitude of Poughkeepsie spoke for itself, as noted in this report from 1879. The boys in Poughkeepsie Gulch, some 60 in number, celebrated their 4th of July in a snowstorm. It snowed all day. As for the name, there was an early prospector that entered the La Plata and Baker's Park, which is what Silverton was called originally. Not Silverton itself, but the area was called Baker's Park from Charles Baker, who came over in 1860 through the area. He didn't find anything, but somehow he was famous for not finding anything. He got his name on the park. Anyway, that was the early prospector was George Howard, and he also has Howardsville named after him. But in 1873, while prospecting with his friend Reuben McNutt, the two spent time in Alpha Gulch, which fell off the side of the page. But one of them was from Pennsylvania. I think, is that where Poughkeepsie is? New York. New York, thank you. Anyway, that was, yes, down by Albany, that's right. And so he loved the name, so he named everything, including almost the trees around there, Poughkeepsie. Q was really hard to find, but I found Quito, which was an original name of Silverton. And there were lots of original names of Silverton. In fact, I think anybody who came into the area declared that his last name was now the new name of Silverton. So we had Greenville, Reeseville, which Reese was one of the original, I think, 8 explorers who came into the Silverton area. It was called Cement Creek and Quito. So in the July 25th, 1874 issue, there was a reference that was made. It said, buildings are being erected in the new town of Quito, in Baker's Park, and wells are being dug. The town company spares no efforts or pains in making improvements as speedily as possible. Several families have settled near the town of Quito for permanent location if the mines prove a success, which they undoubtedly will. And I wonder why my stuff is cutting off on the side. Anyway, it was announced in the next issue that Quito had lost out. So what that sentence up there is supposed to say is instead of Quito, the town company in Baker's Park will now be called Silverton. So they think they got the name Silverton because one of the miners was a little bit tipsy and he said, "Man, we got silver by the ton." Believe it if you want. Ridgeway, which was founded in 1891 by the Denver and Rio Grande Railway and its affiliate, the Rio Grande Southern. The town was an important terminus and gateway to the silver mines of Rico and Telluride. And in honor of the company's superintendent, Robert M. Ridgway, that's Ridgway without an E, the town was named. The town of Dallas was just a few miles to the north of Ridgway, and I told you they lost their bid for the railroad. The silver crash of 1893 put the brakes on Ridgway's growth, yet the railroad continued to operate until, that's a mystery. 45, right? When? 54. 54, thank you. Slumgullion Pass. Who's been over Slumgullion Pass? Yay, it's a beautiful drive. So that's between Lake City and Creed. So Slumgullion Pass is at 11,530 and was once the target of the failed John C. Fremont expedition in 1848. A rock slide hundreds of years ago, coupled with another a few hundred years ago, gave the landscape a yellowish color that reminded settlers of an Irish and Scottish meat and potato stew of the same name. And it also, some say that it reminded some of the fatty remnants of a butchered whale bearing the same name. So romantic. Tin Cup, that's one of my favorite towns. It's up in Taylor Park. It's at 12,154 feet. It's either spelled with 2 words or 1 word, depends on where you see it and which old newspaper you look at. And sometimes it's spelled 1 word with a capital T and a capital C, so it can be a lot of different ways. But it was originally named Virginia City, which always reminds me of Bonanza, because they had Virginia in the opening. But it was a short-lived mining district. It's near Cumberland Pass. In 1880, there were 1,453 men and 42 women living there. I wonder who did the cooking. And it was in existence until 1918 when the post office was closed. There were 2 sheriffs murdered in town. One of the sheriffs, it's kind of an interesting story. He went off to go do some mining, and he came back 6 months later, and he went up to the door of his cabin in great hopes of seeing his wife after 6 months. And who opens the door but his wife's lover, who immediately goes for his gun and shoots the sheriff.
Oh.
Yeah, I tell you. I don't know if he hit any gold while he was out either. More than one man has bitten the dust upon the streets, and bullet holes in the sides of the buildings attest to the bad marksmanship of the inhabitants. Had it been otherwise, the town would have been depopulated within the first 6 months. I think there was a lot of drinking in Tin Cup also. Anyway, Fred Lotus, there's a campground up near Taylor River, which is called Lotus Creek. But Fred came over, and what's cut off there for some reason is that he was digging in the creek with a tin cup to find gold, and so that's why they named it Tin Cup. There's also a cemetery in Tin Cup that is divided by religions, and they've stopped taking customers there because they don't know who's buried where anymore, and they were trying to bury people, and they were digging up bones, and they decided, okay, no more customers in Tin Cup Cemetery. Boy, this is cut off too. It must be my program. So U and B is Uraban and Bancorum. So for Uraban, it's a combination of the uranium and vanadium, which are 2 minerals that were extracted from the unincorporated town site. It was established in 1935 by the United States Vanadium Corporation on a site previously known as Joe Junior Mill. which began operating in 1912. The town has been evacuated and demolished. I mean, they buried it over. It's a Superfund site right now because of everybody was glowing in the dark over there. And there was a lot of like lung cancer, and there were high cancer rates in the area. Van Corum was built in 1942, and it was affectionately known as Snob Hill. It had 14 cabins, which housed the bosses and the former mining company. And today it's kind of an artsy place. It was built by 3 architects from Telluride, and you can go find out all about yourself there for I'm sure a hefty cost. Wiminoosh Wilderness encompasses 488,210 acres. It is kind of between Creed and Highway 550 area. It's down, south of Silverton in that area. It is the largest federal wilderness area of Colorado. It's a Ute name related to one band of those who roamed southern Colorado for centuries, meaning canyon people. And there's a Wiminoosh Pass, which is 10,629 feet. Z was even harder to find than Q. But I found Z way over there by south of Sterling, east of Denver. It's situated between Fort Morgan and Yuma on a railroad line, and there's nothing left there but the rails. Author Jim Flynn surmises that the name was originally given to the spot by a forlorn Ohioan who was from the town of Xenia, Ohio. And Xenia was begun in 1883 as a campsite for the Burlington and Missouri River Railroad. In Greek, it means hospitality. At one point, of origin unknown, it was also referred to as Cody, who I suspect was the last person who left. Yankee Boy Mine and Yankee Boy Basin, William Weston and George Barber discovered the mine in 1877. You kind of see their names all over early Ouray history. They were digging everywhere they could to find their riches. The Yankee Boy Mine is located just south of Ouray. They named the mine, and I could not find why they named it Yankee Boy Mine, but that's what they named it. And it lent its name also to the basin, which if you've ever been up there in the summertime, it's just full of wildflowers everywhere. It's beautiful. The remains of the mine can be found above Twin Falls. The mine yielded $50,000 in its first year, which was quite a sum in the day. Its third year it yielded $56,000, which was a record for a San Juan mine that year. And ever since, it's been bought and sold, bought and sold, bought and sold. And everybody who buys it says they're going to be rich and they're going to make the town of Ouray rich, and then they leave after a year. Non-stop. Like a Ponzi scheme. Did I skip something? Yay, word Z. So we'll end it on a native note, which are the Zunis. The Zuni historically are people of a village or pueblo. Originally they called themselves the Ashiwi, which translated as the flesh. The Zuni territory is now in the western part of New Mexico near the Arizona border. Their language was unique, unlike any of the Pueblo Indians. They lived in multi-storied units connected by ladders, built of stone and plaster. They farmed, hunted, and fished, and along with the Hopi and the Rio Grande Pueblo Indians, they all comprise what is known as the Southwest Indians. And there's the alphabet.
He gave us so much information. I'm not sure how many questions you have, but for those of you who have not been to forum, the procedure is if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll bring the mic. We do that because Will Woody from the city is videoing this, and it will be on YouTube, the city's YouTube channel. So, questions? Anybody? Kelvin?
Alan, you were the plain dealer for a long time. I understand there was a newspaper prior to that. I think it was the name of Muldoon.
The solid Muldoon.
Solid Muldoon.
David Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was ornery. I think he invented the term, excuse my French, don't piss off people who buy ink by the barrel. And you didn't want to get on the bad side of David Day, for sure.
Other questions? What is the most unusual thing you've come across in your history?
Oh my gosh. I think I don't know about unusual, but the thing I'm always astounded by is the lack of or the lawlessness in the early days of the mining towns, and it continued on when there were labor wars and like the Ludlow massacre and things like that. It just was nonstop. But like in Ouray, it's kind of funny. They didn't have a jail. They had a caboose that they used as a jail. And they used to say, and they probably could have written it on the side of the caboose, that it was as easy to get out of as it was to get into. Law and order was kind of just a suggestion back in the early days.
And of the cities that survived, like Ouray and Ridgeway, did they survive because of mining, because of the railroad? Why did they last and these other towns didn't?
I think, there was, like in Ouray, there was enough mining to carry you through. Like when the Campbird was found, this was after the 1893 silver crash. The Campbird was gold, and so they were pulling $5,000 a day of gold out of that mine, which was just a fortune back in those days. In fact, the guy I recently wrote about him, he ended up buying his wife the Hope Diamond. He had so much money. But I think you had to have something else. Ridgeway had agriculture to fall back on, and they had the train to fall back on. You had to have something else. But there were towns around that are just no more. Like you talk about, you look over in the Aspen area, which Aspen was a lot of silver. And when the 1893 silver crash happened, all those people, they all just went everywhere. But there were towns there was Ashcroft, there was Turlet. They all had 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in them. And then overnight, they were just gone because they didn't have anything else to go, to fall back on. So if you were a silver mine, if you were a silver town, you just struggled mightily after 1893 in Colorado.
Anybody else questions?
I see the marble quarry is still in production and accumulating quite a bit of marble down there in the Delta area. Do you know a history behind that?
Behind the current operation?
Yes.
I don't. I don't know the current operation. I know the original operation inside out, but I don't know the current operation. The original one has a great history in that the gentleman who came in, the problem with Marble was there was no railroad, and even when they got a railroad up there, it was really cost prohibitive to ship it out and then ship it out and then ship it out again to Ohio and such like that. So they were constantly trying to find investors. And there was a woman who owned a newspaper there in around 1910, 1912. She had come over from Crested Butte where she made everybody mad, and then she came over to Marble and made everybody mad because she had a penchant for this thing called the truth. And so she called the Marble, she called the whole Marble business a stock selling swindle, which didn't go over well with the president of the Marble Yule Company, he had been pretty successful in his times. He had built the railway around Mexico City. He had founded Nabisco, I think it was, company. He had his hand in a lot of things that had gone well. But then he came here and he thought he could just make Marble rock and roll. And the problem was the shipping cost. And so I think, that they may still have that problem over in Marble today. I'm guessing that their profit margin isn't that great because it's just difficult to ship out of there.
I actually know about that because Jenny and Marco Pizzica from Italy moved in our neighborhood, and they were a young couple. Jenny didn't even speak English, and he is in charge of marketing and just was so enthusiastic about what they're doing that I asked him to come to Forum. So the first time I asked him, he said he'd love to do it, checked with the company back in Italy, and they were fairly new at the time and didn't trust us. And so they wouldn't allow him to come and speak, or maybe they didn't trust Marco, I don't know. Anyway, so then I asked him a couple of years later, and he said yes, and backed out at the last minute. But they're going gangbusters. He's so enthusiastic about it. Not to say it doesn't fall apart because of transportation, just like we know the history of mining. But they actually shipped that marble back to Italy because he said the quality is so much better than what they have in Italy. And if I can get Marco to come, I will do that. He's so enthused about all of it, so energetic. It's just really fun to listen to him. I thought it was interesting that they chose the Delta location to stockpile things. But obviously that's because of the railroad spur and the fact that they're shipping it internationally. But he has been here, how long have Jenny and Marco been here? Over 5 years, 6 years?
I think so.
Quite a while. But I'll try and see if he'll come talk. Calvin.
He talked to everybody.
Did he? Can you add anything, Silka?
Can I add anything?
Well, the only thing I remember from his presentation in Rotary was that it is a very active company. They have a lot of mines there yet. I thought it was kind of a small operation that they had, but they have several mines that they haven't even opened yet. And it's a big operation. I was totally amazed at the size of the operation that is going on there already right now. And I believe they're trucking it out, if I remember correctly.
So most people have heard of Outward Bound, an adventure organization, which was formed by a guy called Kurt Hahn from Germany, brought it to England. So when Outward Bound moved to the United States, the first Outward Bound camp here was in Marble.
Tom?
Can you talk a little bit about how the world wars affected western Colorado in their mining, their communities, et cetera?
I generally focus on history prior to World War I, but I do know that since we're on the topic of marble, for instance, and I'm like 80,000 words into my book on marble, that it's hard to find a lot of information on marble. You would think you could find more. And the reason is because they had, in World War II, they had a recycling program and nationwide, and they recycled, everything, steel, paper. Anyway, there was a kid in Marble who won 7th place nationwide for recycling paper out of Marble. And he threw away all the history that I want. That's what he did. But I do know, and I really haven't studied that, so I'm not much on that, but I do know that anywhere there were railroad tracks that weren't being used, they pulled them up and turned them into bullets. And, just any kind of metal they could find was going off to the war effort. So I'm afraid that a lot of our history got ground up and used in different ways because of the wars.
Any other questions? If not,
I'm not sure, but what about the missing E in Ridgeway?
His name never had an E. It doesn't, but anybody who's not from Ridgeway always spells it with an E.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But if you find it,
how about another round of applause?